So when you get an offer letter, the salary is going to be the first thing you see. But what if I told you there's a lot more you need to consider? So in this video, I'm not going to go into anything that's like how much you enjoy it or the work environment. We're only talking monetary here. When you look at that salary offer, you may see that number and think that's what I'm going to go off of. But there are a lot of situations where it actually makes sense to accept a lower salary considering these things. Now, before I go into it, if you like this stuff, please give me a like. It seems to me that if you don't like this video, people just aren't going to see it past the first 10 or 20. So I'm not saying that salary isn't important, because it definitely is. It is to me, and it's probably one of the biggest things you're going to look at, and there is a good reason for that. That's how much money that you make. So it's very important that you have an adequate salary. That being said, there's a bunch of other things that are really important and affect you monetarily almost to the same degree as your salary does. So let's go into the first one, and if you live in America, that would be health insurance. Now, if you are getting out of college and you're in your 20s, you're probably not even going to think about this. And this isn't even mentioned on the offer letter. You probably received a pamphlet somewhere along the line of the interviews and stuff where it tells you the health insurance benefits and how they work. But if you live in America especially, this is something that's really important for you to consider. And that's because even if you're in your 20s and don't have any health problems, I hate to tell you this, but you probably will somewhere down the line. And more than that, perhaps especially if you're in your 20s, there's always the risk of some kind of accident or something actually getting you a really big hospital bill. See, in America, hospitals aren't like they are in other countries. Yes, they will save your life and they will do, everything they can to get you out of an emergency situation, but they're also sort of traps where they will try to put you into debt for the rest of your life. And there's countless, images and videos about people that have received enormous hospital bills that are way beyond any normal person's ability to pay. And they basically have to make a deal with these hospitals to pay this off over time, which basically takes a chunk out of your salary. And down the line, even all the way up to retirement, this is something that can affect you. So health insurance is really important here for two reasons. One is the coverage. So there's in-network and out-of-network coverage. And out-of-network coverage basically normally means no coverage. Now, I have very good health insurance where I work, where I actually do get covered to a pretty high extent for out-of-network, but most don't even cover it at all. And the network itself also matters. If the network is really narrow, then the chances you're going to end up at a hospital and get an anesthesiologist that isn't in network and end up with a $120,000 bill, that goes up quite a bit. Now, these traps can really hurt you monetarily. And even if your salary is high, you would then have to deduct that from your salary if you are just making decisions monetarily. And if you look at that healthcare plan and see that it isn't a very good one, this is something you need to take into account. The other reason is the deductible. So if you have a high deductible, that basically means for most normal things, you don't have health insurance. If you have a $10,000 deductible, that means that you would have to pay $10,000 out of pocket before they'll cover anything. Now, of course, it's more complicated than this, and I'm not doing an entire video on how health insurance works, but these are things that you need to look at, and it is very complicated. If you don't understand it, I implore you to have somebody that knows a little bit more, probably somebody that's a little bit older and has had to deal with it themselves, take a look at the pamphlet they gave you and tell you how good of a health insurance plan is this. So the next thing is the retirement plan. And retirement plans are actual real dollars. This is money that is going to be set aside that you can take out when you're of retirement age so that you will be able to live without working. But it is your money. Now, you can also borrow against these 401ks where you can actually give yourself a loan if you need it and then pay yourself back. Now, you do have to pay yourself back with interest, but either way, this is your money. It's just a little bit restricted. Now, what most companies will do is they'll allow you to put a certain amount of your salary towards this. You just never see it. It goes straight into that. It's not in the paycheck that you cash, but it's still your money. Now, why is this important? Well, because some companies will just say, okay, how much do you want to put in? And you put it in and it comes out of your salary. Other companies might match that in some way. They might do a certain percentage, they might do a full match, and even some companies will do more than that. So if you have a company that just allows you to stow for retirement, then that's okay and that's a decent thing and you can choose to do it or not. But if you have a company that matches, that's free money for you. So basically, if you put in 6% of your salary and then the company matches what you put in, then you get an extra 6% of money. If they double that, then you get 12%. Now, generally, especially companies that match or better, they will limit how much you can put in, as far as how much they're willing to match up to. But still, if they're willing to match or more than that, that is money in your pocket, and you may not be able to access it until you're older, but you can also give yourself loans against this 401k, so it's money that you have at your disposal to some degree. So again, this is your money and the percentages can really add up. And what they do with that can be really important. So the next thing is the cost of living in the area. Now this assumes you're not working remote, of course, but if you are going to live in the place that you work, the state and especially the city really matters when it comes to what job you want to take at what salary. So if I can give you an example, making $80,000 in Florida is really good. Making $80,000 in San Francisco or most places in California is you're living in your car. So you really need to look at this and figure out how much is the cost of living and then how much are they offering to pay me. For instance, I would quickly take $80,000 in Florida over, say, 90 or even 100,000 in California. The difference is really that big. Now, not all states are that pronounced. There are differences. California is known to be very expensive. The Northeast, especially New York, is known to be expensive, but even other areas of the Northeast are generally more expensive. The South, the Midwest, that's known to kind of be low. Now, part of the reason for this is income tax. Different states have different levels of income tax. The thing about income tax is if you take a higher salary in a state with a higher income tax, that's money that may technically be part of your salary, but you'll never see it. And whether or not it goes to benefit you is very debatable with a job like this. For instance, I grew up in Florida and they have no income tax, but I came to work here in Maryland. Now, I always have to ask myself, now that I have this income tax, this state income tax, what is it really doing for me? And what I found is that most of the services that it does pay for actually don't really help me personally. It's things like public transportation, which, with a salaried job where I'm making good money, I'm not really going to find myself on the bus unless maybe something really bad happens. So those are all things to consider, and there's a lot further we can go into that. I did a video on this, I will link it below, but let's move on to the next topic. So the next one is how long will you be working? And this is something that can be really hard to gauge because a lot of companies will not be upfront with you about this. Most companies will say we have an excellent work-life balance, whether or not they do. And you will notice today there are people that make a point when they're going to apply for jobs or when they interview to ask about work-life balance because sometimes that's why they're leaving the job they used to be at. Now, work-life balance basically is a way of saying, am I going to be working a ton of overtime? How much of my time is my own and how much belongs to the company? Now, this can be kind of sneaky because a lot of times it's not that you're really required to work overtime. Sometimes it's that you want to, because I do that all the time where I'm willing to work overtime. That's something that I volunteer to do, but at the same time, it does take away from my life when I do that. Now, I'm lucky enough to work somewhere where I work very little overtime, but especially in tech, that is not always the case, that sometimes you will be working way more than your 40-hour week. You might be doing a 60-hour week, and that just has become normal. And that's why it's hard to ask about, because a lot of times there's no actual requirement that you do it. You just kind of have to do it to be successful in your role. Now, why this is important is because if you're making double the salary somebody else is, but you're working double the hours, you're not really doing better than them. So you have to ask yourself what you're going for. Are you just trying to do whatever you have to do in life to make as much money as you can? Or do you want the time in your life to spend that money and do things with it? So this is something that's really important to consider, although it is hard to figure out. Now, the last one is usually easier to figure out, and it is really important, and it's something that you should ask about. If anything, it does make for a good interview question, and that is, what are the long-term prospects for this position? Now, you generally are probably thinking of, okay, I get a job, I work there for as long as I want, and then whatever, maybe I decide to leave, maybe I decide to stay. Whatever. That's not always how it works though. In fact, in a lot of cases, you might be being hired to work a single project. And that doesn't mean that after that project you're necessarily gone, but there might be a decent chance of that. In fact, one reason people will put on their resume or tell another interviewer later on for the reason that they don't work at the company they work at anymore is that the project ended. So especially in things like tech and engineering, there are cases where you're hired to do a finite project, where you're going to work this project until it's finished, and then you're going to leave. There's other positions more like mine where you're kind of there long term to support something, and develop. I basically develop things and then support them long term and continue to develop new things. It's kind of understood that once I'm finished with the project I'm on, I will move on to another project. Now, none of this is ever guaranteed, but it is important, and here's why. Because if you are on something where you are not going to be there long term, well, then a bunch of things actually happen to you. One, you will have some time where you don't have income and you're between jobs. Another is there may be a move involved with that. Now, the company may pay for your move to where they are, but they probably aren't going to pay for your next job. Now, maybe your next job will, maybe they won't, you don't really know. Another thing it sort of precludes you from doing is doing things like buying real estate. So if you can't buy a house, then the problem is you can't build equity where you live. If you're just renting, then you're basically just giving that money to a renter. So if you're working somewhere where you don't think you're going to be there long term, then it would probably be unwise to buy a house when you may need to move 2 years later. But if you are able to get comfortable there, and or at least have a high level of confidence that you're going to be working there long term, then you can buy a house, and the money you put in, at least most of it, especially now while interest rates are low, will go into the equity of that house. And when you go to move and you sell that house, you get that money back that you can then use to buy another house or use to pay rent for a long time. So this is just about like where your salary goes. If you own and your salary goes into equity in something that belongs to you, that's money that you still have. Perhaps, yes, it is being paid for your cost of living, but it's money that you can get back. If you're renting, then that's money that goes away every month and you'll never see that money again. So, okay, I hope these things have been helpful. These are all really important things to consider, and I know that when you're right out of college and you're looking at a job, it's really easy just to be happy you got an offer at all, and if you see a high salary, it's really easy to say, oh yeah, I'm down, and that's fine, But if you're comparing offers or you're comparing your salary with your peers, these are other things that are really, really important. Okay, guys? Have a good night.